During their trip, A and her roommates spent a terrifying night at a hotel where strange occurrences were frequent, leading to an argument with the hotel manager. Although they safely returned to school, the strange events quickly resumed, haunting them. First, it was their dormitory, where things inexplicably started disappearing. They could see them one day, but the next day, they couldn't find them anywhere, as if there were people from another world present. What struck A the most was one night when everyone in their dormitory was resting. Their dormitory beds were bunk beds, and each person would hang curtains on their bed to preserve their own space. That night, at 11 o'clock, A was ready to sleep, but she couldn't fall asleep. The lamp on the table of her neighbor E was on brightly, and it kept making typing sounds as if someone were typing. A couldn't stand it anymore and decided to ask E to be quieter. Before she could say anything, she heard the sound of E opening the door and leaving the room. The room became quiet, but E didn't turn off the lamp. A still couldn't sleep, so she waited for E to come back and remind her to turn off the light. Strangely, E didn't return for a long time. Frustrated, A pulled back the curtain and looked towards E's direction, only to be shocked. The lamp on E's table wasn't even on. The light that had been there all along seemed to vanish as soon as the curtain was pulled back. Even more terrifying was the sight of E sleeping in her bed. So who had just left the room? Looking around the dormitory, the other 5 people were all in their own beds. The next morning, unsurprisingly, none of the roommates admitted to going out the previous night, and although the dormitory door had been locked, it was left unlocked. It was extremely eerie. However, since there was no resolution to the matter, it was left unresolved. This convinced A that they had encountered a supernatural event. What happened next was even more frightening. C got into trouble. At that time, C and D had a disagreement over some trivial matters, so C asked A to go out with her to relax. Although A spoke a few kind words for D, it unexpectedly angered C even more. She left A on the spot and walked away in anger. But just a few steps away, something happened. A car suddenly rushed out, and C had an accident. The ambulance and police arrived afterward. Upon examination, C had multiple fractures and cerebral contusions throughout her body. Luckily, after being rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment, she was finally out of danger. This incident made A and D feel very guilty. They shouldn't have argued with C. If they hadn't argued, maybe this accident wouldn't have happened. So, A and D went to the hospital immediately to take turns taking care of C. And this made her realize that something was seriously wrong. The next day, when C woke up, the police came to the hospital to investigate. The situation was very strange. C insisted that she had looked back and forth several times when crossing the road, but hadn't seen any cars. However, the driver's account was that her car was running fine, and C suddenly rushed out. Later, surveillance footage showed that C did indeed look towards the lane, and there were indeed cars on the lane. But C ignored them and rushed into the lane as if she were blindfolded. Furthermore, during C's hospitalization, her behavior became increasingly strange. When asleep, she would wave her arms on the bed as if grabbing something. She would also continuously make sounds like as if wanting to speak but unable to. As time went on, C's behavior became very dull. When classmates came to visit her, she would just stare silently without speaking, giving the impression of an elderly lady in her last moments. Once, something even scarier happened. A was taking care of C halfway through and went outside to the toilet. On the way back from the toilet, she heard C shouting from a distance, loudly covering her ears, shouting at the air not to speak, not to listen, as if someone were talking to her, but there was no one beside her. The scene was chaotic, and then C suddenly collapsed. When she woke up, C's ears were deaf, echoing the words she shouted before fainting, as if she had encountered a ghost. But why did she encounter a ghost? Several roommates discussed and speculated that it was related to that hotel. After much thought, they told C's mother about the incident. When C's mother learned about it, she took C home to take care of her, and C dropped out of school. However, this matter did not end with C's dropping out. In fact, apart from C, A and F also felt a little off after returning from the trip, but not as serious as C. They didn't pay much attention to it. However, since C got sick, and they often went to the hospital afterward, things became more serious. First, A lost her appetite, couldn't eat anything, lost a lot of hair, and saw shadows inexplicably. Her eyes also started to hurt continuously, as if someone were poking her eyeballs. She lost 10 kilograms in a short time, and even after going to the hospital for a checkup, nothing was found. As for F, she started sleepwalking, often wandering around the dormitory alone at midnight. There was even one time when E saw her sitting on the bed alone, and then making movements as if she were helping someone comb their hair, as if there was someone in front of her, which scared E. Later, F also developed a skin disease, with a lot of red spots all over her body, which didn't improve even with medication. A and F thought of C and immediately associated it with the hotel room. Upon learning about this, their respective families went to seek help from mediums. At that time, A's family found a very famous local priest. A remembers very clearly that during the ceremony, the priest asked A to call out the names of deceased relatives like grandparents, but there was no response. However, when A mentioned the incident at the hotel, there was an immediate reaction. Then the priest hurriedly performed an exorcism with them. However, after completing all this the next morning, things not only didn't improve, but became worse. I had inexplicable bruises all over her body and was in extreme pain. When the priest was called again, he bluntly said that he couldn't do anything. The ghosts were too fierce. Later, A's family continued to seek many rituals, but there was no improvement. A was on the verge of a breakdown. Then, one afternoon, A received a call from F's mother, saying that she had found a powerful exorcist at that hotel and asked her to hurry over. The expert said that to resolve this matter, F and A needed to go to the hotel again. Upon receiving the call, A quickly arrived in that city. That night, they desperately pleaded with the hotel manager and stayed in the same room again. As soon as they entered the room, A felt uncomfortable all over. She also noticed that the broken mirror had been replaced with a similar one. Looking at herself in the mirror, she felt an inexplicable sense of gloom. Then the exorcist tied a red thread around their hands, made them stand in separate corners, and gave them each a coin. They were instructed not to turn back no matter what happened. If they felt like someone was tugging at the red thread on their hands, they were to throw the coin out. Then the ceremony began. Because she was too scared, A kept her eyes tightly shut throughout the entire ceremony, hoping it would end soon. The ceremony was indeed very scary. Shortly after it began, she felt very cold and couldn't stop wanting to scream. Then strange sounds came from the room, with random knocking sounds. Soon after, A felt something tugging at the red thread on her hand, so she threw the coin out. Then the room returned to calm. After a quiet period of more than half an hour, the exorcist took a tool and patted their heads and shoulders 3 times each, and the ceremony finally ended. The next day, not only did all the red spots on F's body mysteriously disappear, but A's eye pain also disappeared, and she started to feel hungry again. Later, on the way out of that city, A specifically asked the exorcist if he could help their friend C. As soon as he heard C's name, the exorcist said directly, "I can't help." He even said a very meaningful sentence. C's problem is not just about encountering ghosts, it's also related to the hotel manager. And he expressed that the manager would get his comeuppance. It was a very strange statement, but when A pressed for more information, the exorcist refused to say anything else. It sounded like the manager had done something like cursing C, but it wasn't certain. Not long after the incident subsided, A, who had disappeared for a while, suddenly posted online, saying that her roommate C had passed away. Netizens asked A what happened, but perhaps due to concerns or fear, A only replied with 4 sentences to commemorate C, her once good roommate. After that, there was no more response. Shortly afterward, the post was deleted, and A's forum account was canceled.